Marks at last week's National Prayer Breakfast in Washington, D.C. Dr. Benjamin Carson is one of the most accomplished physicians in the entire world. But despite his many accolades, which include being awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2008, he was an unknown quantity to many Americans. That is, until he stepped up to the podium last Thursday morning, and with the President of the United States sitting just steps away, Dr. Carson eloquently and politely described his vision for saving America. Among the topics that he covered, the perils of political correctness, education, the healthcare system, and much more. Let's take a look at a quick preview.
One last thing about political correctness, which I think is a horrible thing, by the way. I'm very, very compassionate, and I'm not ever out to offend anyone. But PC is dangerous. Because you see, this country, one of the founding principles was freedom of thought and freedom of expression. And it muffles people. It puts a muzzle on them. Why is it so important that we educate our people? Because we don't want to go down the same pathway as many other pinnacle nations who have preceded us. I think particularly about ancient Rome. Very powerful. Nobody could even challenge them militarily. But what happened to them? They destroyed themselves from within. Moral decay. Fiscal irresponsibility. They destroyed themselves. And if you don't think that can happen to America, you get out your books and you start reading.
Now, we're going to have much more of the doctor's speech as we continue tonight, but not surprisingly, whenever somebody has the courage to speak truth to power, particularly when it involves the president, well, he or she quickly becomes a bit of a political lightning rod. Now, that familiar phenomenon happened in the aftermath of Dr. Carson's comments, with some pundits describing his actions as, quote, disrespectful. Now, tonight he will have the opportunity to respond to those critics. We'll also hear from the doctor on how we can turn around the economy, restore credibility to our healthcare system. Also, Frank Luntz tonight will stop by with a focus group of voters who actually dialed Dr. Carson's speech. Now, do they think he may have a shot sometime in the future at the White House? Well, that surprising answer lies ahead. But before we get into all of that, it's time to meet the man himself. We welcome author of America the Beautiful and the director of pediatric neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins University, Dr. Benjamin Carson. It's an honor to have you. Welcome aboard.
Thank you.
Welcome, everybody. Doctor, you've gone viral. Maybe not something you predicted in your life?
Yeah, usually in medicine when we think of viruses, it's not a good thing. But this one, this one turned out to be very good because I've been just overwhelmed by the responses. So many people are just overjoyed to hear some common sense. And I don't think that I've put forth anything that's that intellectually challenging. It's just that it's so much better than most of what we're hearing from Washington that it seems like, a great revelation. And, the important thing, I think, is to begin the dialogue. Some people say, you can't say something like that in front of the president. Well, when did this become a monarchy? We are the people. The president works for us. And, we need to remember that, this is a country that is for, of, and by the people, not for, of, and by the government. And that is the big battle that we are in right now. And we need to make a decision with our eyes open. Which country do we want to be?
It's interesting because you made the comparison of ancient Rome, and you said this could happen to America. Is that something you fear?
I definitely fear it because we're in very much the same position that they were in. So powerful, pinnacle nation in the world, no competition, going to be there forever, so they thought. And then all the military expansionism started. And capturing this group and this group, of course, that requires a lot of resources when you capture people to keep them under control. And they quickly began to run out of money. And then they're looking for any kind of scheme to get money from the people. And the rich people, they have a lot of money, so let's come up with some schemes to get their money. And, of course, that erodes another aspect of confidence and creativity within your society. And they just continued right down the path of destruction.
And that could happen here.
It's in the process of happening. The real question is, are we smart enough to stop it? Can we actually learn from those who've gone before us? Or must we inexorably go down the same path as all those people who've preceded us and done the same thing?
Let's hope not. You actually used the phrase on my buddy Neil Cavuto's show. You said, somebody's got to stand up to these bullies. Define the bullies that you were talking about.
Well, the bullies I'm talking about are the PC police. And, they come in many shapes and forms. Certainly a lot of them in your business.
I'm very well aware of them, yes.
The media who try to define what you're supposed to think. And unfortunately, I think it's the very thing that our founders were talking about when they said it's so important, and our system of government is based upon a well-informed populace, because if they're not well-informed, they are very easy to manipulate. And all you have to do is look at some of those Jay Leno segments where they go man on the street.
Jaywalking.
Yeah.
My favorite segment. By your background, this is amazing to me, your background. Your mom was married at 13, one of 24 children?
Yes.
And you were not a very good, you were a troublemaker.
I was perhaps the worst student you've ever seen. I thought I was stupid. All my classmates thought I was stupid, so there was general agreement.
But that was in 5th grade.
That was in 5th grade. And, fortunately for me, my mother believed in me when no one else did. And she just said, Benjamin, you're much too smart to be bringing home grades like this. I brought them home anyway, but she was always saying that. And one day she just came home after being at work and being inspired by looking at all the books that her employers were reading. And she said, you guys are going to read books and you're going to stop watching so much television. And she made a prediction which is really quite uncanny. She said, if you start reading books, one day people will be looking at you on television. Hi, everybody.
Very well said. But it was even deeper than that. She had a 3rd grade education herself.
Yes. And
you made a comment in that speech that she would look over your reports. You had to write a book report.
Right. She said we had to read 2 books apiece and submit to her written book reports, which she couldn't read, but we didn't know that. She would put little check marks and highlights, and we would think that she was reading them, but she wasn't. But I hated it so much because everybody else was outside playing and having a good time. My brother and I was stuck in the house reading these books. But after a while, I actually began to enjoy reading the books, because even though we were desperately poor, between the covers of those books, I could go anywhere, I could be anybody, I could do anything. I began to read about amazing people. I read about Booker T. Washington, his autobiography called Up From Slavery. He was a slave, and it was illegal for slaves to read. And that right there is a topic in and of itself that a lot of young people should be thinking about. Why was it illegal for slaves to read? Because the slave owners knew that if they could read, they could liberate themselves. And the same thing goes today. Those young people who are not availing themselves of the educational opportunities are intentionally enslaving themselves.
The Latin phrase for education, educere, to bring forth from within, it presupposes all of these kids were born with that talent. That's their gift.
Absolutely.
You had a particular talent, too, in school, where you could push people's buttons. I read a commencement address you gave in 2007. That was a particularly good talent of yours.
It was. I would study my classmates to figure out what made them really, really angry, because, they were always calling me dummy, so this is the way I would get back at them. And I would figure out what made them angry, and I would just irritate them until they were about to explode. Boy, I would never push the last button until we were in the classroom and the teacher was nearby.
All right, stay right there. Dr. Carson, we have a lot more to get to tonight. Still ahead, an open forum between Dr. Carson and our studio audience of journalists, political strategists, medical experts, and much more. Plus, there is already talk about recruiting the doctor for potentially a 2016 run. We're going to check in with Frank Luntz and his focus group, who actually dialed the speech that had everybody talking. And let's just say he may have found some campaign volunteers for Team Carson. Saving America continues straight ahead.
What about our taxation system? So complex. There is no one who can possibly comply with every jot and tittle of our taxes. What we need to do is come up with something that's simple. And when I pick up my Bible, you know what I see? I see the fairest individual in the universe, God, and He's given us a system. It's called tithe. Now, we don't necessarily have to do it 10%, but it's principle. He didn't say, if your crops fail, don't give me any tithes. He didn't say, if you have a bumper crop, give me triple tithes. So there must be something inherently fair about proportionality.
All right, finally, after months, if not years, of hearing President Obama lecture the so-called rich about paying their fair shares, well, somebody finally had the courage to stand up and issue a rebuttal to the president and his divisive class warfare rhetoric. Now, it came when Dr. Benjamin Carson issued a forceful challenge to the president's liberal approach to last week's National Prayer Breakfast. But unlike so many politicians in Washington, the doctor's comments were much more than meaningless bluster. He actually backed them up with facts and policy proposals, including a flat tax. Joining me now to talk about his approach to saving America's failing economy, my guest for the hour, please, everybody, welcome back, Dr. Benjamin Carson. But I'm just curious. I don't know if anyone's even asked you this question yet. What was the president's reaction personally to your speech? Did you talk to him?
I talked to him afterwards, and he came over. He was very gracious. Said, thank you for your speech. He didn't say he enjoyed it, but he did say, and he said he admired me.
I suspect you might have known that going in. Let me play. You said something in talking about the economy that really hit home with me, okay. And that's about the deficit. $16.5 trillion we have.
That is a number that is so mind-boggling, and that's why I said if you counted one number per second, it would take you 507,000 years, more than 500,000 years. It's a number that's just staggering, and it's continuing to grow. And, we sit around and we talk about, well, maybe we can keep it from growing further. We need to reduce it. And the way to reduce it, obviously, is to get the economy growing again. It doesn't really do any good to keep taking from this tree or that tree and squeezing it down. I like parables. So in the book America the Beautiful, I give a parable of two brothers, identical brothers, and they're put on deserted islands with their families. And one had the philosophy, they only ate trees and products of trees. One had the philosophy, I'm going to eat what I need and I'm going to let the others grow. Pretty soon he had an entire forest. He had enough food forever. The other one, as soon as a sapling came up, he was on it and eating it. And he and his family eventually starved to death. It's basically the same kind of thing if you keep taking and taking rather than creating a situation where you can grow. And you look at the fact that we have the highest corporate taxes in the world, and then we wonder why companies are going offshore. Well, we need to go back to basic business school and understand that companies are there to earn money, not to be social welfare organisms.
Mm-hmm. And let me play for you a history. This is President Obama has said many, many times that he's going to fix the debt and the deficit, and he spoke earlier this week at the State of the Union. Let's go down memory lane here.
Now, what I've done throughout this campaign is to propose a net spending cut. And I want to go through the federal budget line by line, page by page. Programs that don't work, we should cut.
Today, I'm pledging to cut the deficit we inherited by half by the end of my first term in office. I will use the money we're no longer spending on war to pay down our debt. My plan would cut our deficit by $4 trillion.
But what my opponent didn't tell you was that federal spending, since I took office, has risen at the slowest pace of any president in almost 60 years.